Hey guys, Jay here and welcome to another cosplay tutorial. Today I'm going to be making felt dagger, but also the sheath. If you'd like to make this for yourself, there'll be a template down in the description. Now you're going to notice that this is inaccurate. There's this big black strip. I explained it in the tutorial, don't worry about that. Also, the template will not have the sheath. The sheath is just the blade, but bigger. That's all you have to do. Anyway, let's get started. Since I don't want to have to sand the bevels into the blade, as that can look really bad sometimes, I'm using a method that I've done before, where I make it out of cardboard, with a 2mm EVA Foam skin top. I remove the blade from the template, including the part with the blade collar, as that will be added as another layer, and trace it onto some cardboard, flipping it over for the second one so that there's two mirrored pieces. I cut the template apart at the bevel so that I can trace that on as well. Having this is important. Then I cut them out with a utility knife. I used an X-Acto blade to carefully cut part way into the cardboard along that center line, and use the back of the knife handle to press the cut in so that I can bend it along that line to get the look of it being beveled without having to sand anything. And here I taped the blade together with a mock-up of the guard so that you can see how that bevel looks when it's got a core inside the hollow cardboard. Before I continue on the blade, I decided to just get the handguard done now. This is probably the easiest part of this entire build. I start by contact cementing two pieces of 4mm What the Foam together that are larger than the shape of the guard. And I'm using What the Foam because it's far stronger than regular foam, but you can use whatever you want. And I'm using 2 layers of 4mm because this foam doesn't come in 8mm, which is the thickness that I want. After tracing out the shape and the center hole, I used my hole drill from TNT Cosplay and cut out the hole in the center where I want the core to be, but I end up making this just a little bit wider. It's kind of in between the smallest and middle sizes of the hole drill set. Then I cut the shape out with a knife. I also don't cut it to the exact size I need because it's very hard to cut around those two far corners, as well as keeping the blade straight. That way I can use the Dremel to sand it down to what I need it to be. At the same time, I also sand an angle into the edge all the way around. Doesn't matter which side you do this on, because you just make the angled side the bottom when you put it together. I also used a bullet-shaped grinding stone that was very heavily used and sort of smoothed out. Using this along all the sanded edges cauterizes the foam and smooths everything out. With that done, I move back to the blade. I use contact cement to glue the cardboard to some 2mm EVA foam, and the side of the cardboard that gets glued down is the side that I did not cut along the center. And then I cut them out with a lot of excess foam around the edges. Then I carefully cut the foam very close to the cardboard, but at an angle with the blade tip pointed away from the cardboard. This angle will help when gluing them together later, which is actually right now. I use contact cement on the edges, which isn't very much surface area to be honest, but the angle makes it so that once the pieces are connected, the seams come to a point, which makes them look sharp. You know, like a blade. And here I'm testing out a few things. You can see the core I'm planning to use. It's a water valve key from the hardware store, which is metal, but pretty easy to bend. I stepped on one end and bent it, then matched it up to the template and marked and cut off what I didn't need. The darker gray piece is an aluminum pipe. I wanted it to be just a little thicker, so this does that. The pipe is also why I had to widen the hole in the center of the guard. The smallest hole drill was the size of that other metal piece, but the next size up was like double the size of the pipe. I superglued 2mm What the Foam to cap off the opened bottom of the blade. This helps it stay in the exact shape that I want it to be, and not twist or something like that, as well as it has more surface area for when I glue it to the guard. I also put the hole in the wrong spot, and I had to make it larger. Just put it in the right spot so that it lines up with the handle correctly the first time. Also, you can just use normal foam if you want. I only used What the Foam here because I had some scrap pieces. So here's the collar I mentioned at the start. As I said, it's an extra layer of foam on top of the blade. I used more of that scrap piece of 2mm What the Foam, but again, you can just use normal foam. I just cut out a strip that fits around the blade and contact cemented to glue it on. Alright, so upon doing the voiceover for this, I realized that this is impossible for me to just do without showing you, so I'm going to do that. So, this is the pommel. This is the hardest part of the entire build for me. So, what this is one of these cones, and this came from my Krona sword build that I did a while ago, and it has 2 truncated cones wrapped around it. So, there are 2 patterns, 4 truncated cones. They're like a part of a circle with another part of a circle cut out inside. And those are this one, is the larger pattern, and this one is the smaller pattern. So what I did was I made the larger one first, and then capped off the bottom with 2mm foam. All of this is out of 2mm foam, by the way. And then I capped it off, and then just sanded it and got it to look good. It doesn't look great when you look at it from the bottom, but it's fine, nobody will notice. And then I put a hole in the center and put this through the top. So this actually sticks into the top cone a little bit. So you can kind of see there, if they're leveled out, or leveled out as good as I can get them anyway. You can see that it goes up into that cone there. And that's needed for how to connect it in a minute. And then this, I wrapped around and I used calipers to measure what I needed for that cone, printed the pattern, and did that. So that's all just super glued together. None of that is contact cemented because that was just easier. And then in order to put it together, you guys might have seen that rod that was in here, that water valve key, that comes down to a little bit into this cone here, and I drilled a hole in the middle going, I want to say 6mm or 7mm into the cone, and then it's inside that. So it's where it connects to the metal. And then it's just filled with Gorilla Glue. And then in order to stop that Gorilla Glue from foaming up and coming out, you could use the clear kind. I don't have any. So I used super glue and super glued this together here. So I super glued it up against the handle, and that creates a barrier that doesn't let that foaming Gorilla Glue out. So you just have to use enough of it to make a barrier. And you'll be able to find these cones, or something at least similar enough, in the description below. After that, I went outside to paint the blade, guard, and pommel with black Plastidip, followed by gloss black spray paint. Before I do any other painting, I decided to get the handle finished first. So this didn't go as great as I expected. I was going to just contact cement a strip of white vinyl spiraling down a piece of 1/2-inch PVC pipe. For some reason, the contact cement would not dry on the back of the vinyl I had. So instead, I had to use super glue, which kept dripping and got everywhere, including on the vinyl, which when my hand stuck to it, ripped off part of the top layer. Luckily, Felt is from the slums and is dirty anyway, so she probably wouldn't have a nice super clean dagger anyway. Having it beat up a little on the handle looks a little more like what she might have, so this works. After spiraling it down the handle, I used scissors to cut off the excess. Also on the handle, right under the guard, there's a little piece. I don't know the name of this thing, but to make it, I used 15mm half dowel and cut that in half down its length so that I had a quarter dowel. Basically a triangle made up of 2 straight lines at a 90-degree angle, and the third side being rounded out. And then I glued it on so that one of the straight sides was against the handle, and the other straight side would be faced up and would glue to the guard. Alright, back to painting. Earlier, I used gloss black because metallic colors look a lot better if you have a glossy surface that you put them on. So I masked off the collar and spray painted the blades silver. I was going to spray paint the rest gold, but it turns out we don't have any. So I had to hit them with a matte clear coat so that I could use acrylic paint instead. You can't use brush-on paints on glossy surfaces because it just doesn't stick that well, which is why I had to clear coat it with matte so it wasn't glossy anymore. I also like to use the hairdryer, using that cooling option that's on them to help the paint dry faster. To glue it together, I used a little bit of Gorilla Glue inside the blade just in case. I don't know if it even did anything, but whatever. Then I used super glue to attach the guard to the bottom of the blade. I also cut little scores into the guard because that'll give the glue a way to get to the foam under the paint, which will help grab on and have a stronger hold. You have to do this pretty much any time you glue on top of a painted surface. I also didn't paint the bottom side of the blade, specifically so that I didn't have to worry about that. To glue the handle on, I needed to bulk up the metal core, because it's much smaller than the pipe. I did this by adding a bunch of tape around the core until the pipe could fit over it a little tightly. I did this in 2 places and used the section between the 2 layers of tape to add Gorilla Glue when putting it together, which will foam up and have a really strong hold. I also used super glue on the quarter dowel to glue it to the guard. The one I use is actually a little wider than the guard, so I have to use super glue and squish it up against the sides. A 10mm half dowel cut in half would have probably been better. With the dagger done, you could stop here if you don't want to make the sheath. If you do, keep watching. To do that, I traced out the blade again, but I made it a little bit bigger and ended up making a test sheath. I made a few actually. Once I liked that, I went ahead and copied that to 4mm What the Foam. Now for this you actually do want What the Foam, not regular foam. Regular foam is too floppy. Anyway, I cut the pieces out on a roughly 45-degree angle so that when I glue them together, it does the same thing that the blade did, where it creates that peak. But the other thing it does is it makes it so it stays open so you can get the blade in there. I also heat formed them to round them off before I glued them, which helps it to also stay open. To paint this, I used black Plastidip again as a sealing coat, but then I used a matte gray primer. I already knew I was going to use the brush on paints for this. I used a color by Apple Barrel called Classic Caramel, and then I used a matte clear coat over the whole thing. For the brown color on the sheath, I wanted to make it out of vinyl instead of painting it on. I just thought it would add a little texture and give it a unique look that probably no one else was going to have. So the first thing I do is I use some nylon belting that's 1 3/4 inch wide and wrap a vinyl strip around it and sew that down all the way around. The one that goes over the tip of the sheath, my camera seems to have not filmed, but I wrapped it in plastic wrap and some tape and made a pattern. Then cut the pattern out of the same vinyl and sewed the edges together, flipped it right side out, and super glued it on the tip. To attach this thing, you'll have to figure out something yourself. Looking at what's on screen, this is what I figured out for our situation. The thicker vinyl black strip will be glued down along the length on the side that will be up against your back. The little buckle things are so that my friend can add straps to her cosplay in order to make it stay on. She's cosplaying the yellow dress version of Felt, which doesn't technically have this dagger, but we want to have it anyway. This was the workaround. If you cosplay her normal outfit, the red and white belt that she has, the sheath attaches to that using the brown strap that I just made. So do whatever you want for attachment. If you want to use the brown strap to attach the belt, then maybe add something into the hollow blade that makes it heavier on that side. The way that I made it, the handle is heavier, so doing it through the strap makes it tilt where the handle faces down, which will cause the dagger to just fall out. I still wanted to make the strap not glued down on the backside, so that at some point if we wanted to thread a belt through that, we still can. So I made it snap together. I used a snap making kit and added them to the strap. Starting with the top side, which I picked black for because it just looked nicer on this, and then wrapped it around the sheath to figure out where the other half of the snap needed to go, and then added that. I also decided to add a layer of that black vinyl strap that I had, which was just a pre-made strip that I found at Joann's, and I bought the entire roll because I figured it would come in handy at some point. It did. Anyway, I just cut enough to line the inside of the sheath and super glue it in place. This is mostly to make the opening just a little bit smaller so the dagger fits a little tighter so it stays in place better. Then I super glued the strap to the one side of the sheath and just let it be loose on the other side and snapped it together. And with that, the sheath in this entire project was finally finished. Alright, so that was the tutorial on how to make the sheath and the dagger for Felt from ReZero. If you guys like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys later.